Now, Chapter 10, Vibhuti Yoga, the Yoga of Divine Glories. After revealing the royal knowledge and secret of devotion in Chapter 9, Krishna now turns to show Arjuna the vastness of his divine manifestations, the Vibhutis, or glorious expressions of his infinite power. Here, Krishna explains that everything extraordinary, powerful, or radiant in this universe is a spark of his infinite splendor. Mountains, rivers, sages, deities, wisdom, strength, beauty, even the silent Om, all are reflections of him. This chapter is both humbling and inspiring. It reminds us that the divine is not confined to temples or rituals, but shines everywhere in greatness, brilliance, and excellence of every form. Psychology calls this awe perception. When the mind recognizes greatness beyond itself, it experiences humility and reverence. Neuroscience observes that awe expands awareness, quiets the ego, and creates a sense of unity. Logic makes it clear. A single spark may seem small, but it still belongs to the eternal fire. For Arjuna, this teaching becomes a turning point, as he begins to truly see Krishna not just as a friend or charioteer, but as the supreme source behind all that exists. In verse 4 and 5, Krishna lists the qualities that arise from him. From me alone arise intelligence, knowledge, freedom from delusion, forgiveness, truth, control of the senses, control of the mind, happiness and sorrow, birth and death, fear and fearlessness, non-violence, equanimity, satisfaction, austerity, charity, fame, and infamy. Here Krishna reveals that every quality, positive or negative, divine or human, ultimately arises from his energy. Nothing exists outside his domain. Psychology explains, human traits, from compassion to fear, are part of the same psyche. They only differ by how they are directed. Neuroscience shows emotions and behaviors share common brain circuits, which can manifest as either destructive or constructive depending on awareness. Logic clarifies, the river gives water for both nourishment and flood, the same source, different outcomes. In verse 6, Krishna continues, the 7 great sages, the 4 ancient manas, and beings of great wisdom, all were born from my mind, and from them came all living beings in the world. Here, Krishna connects the origin of creation to his divine will. Even the legendary sages, considered fountains of wisdom, are but sparks of his consciousness. Psychology interprets this as the idea that inspiration flows from one great source, the archetypal mind. Neuroscience suggests that ideas and traditions evolve from deep-rooted patterns in the collective brain of humanity. Logic shows, branches may seem independent, but all carry the sap of the same tree. In verse 7, Krishna concludes this section. One who truly knows this vast power of mine, and worships me with unwavering devotion, is united with me without doubt. This is the link between knowledge and devotion. To see Krishna as the source is not just intellectual. It inspires the heart to bow in love. Psychology calls this integrated awareness. When intellect and emotion align in one devotion, neuroscience notes, when thought and feeling harmonize, the brain enters states of coherence and resilience. Logic affirms, when the river knows its source, it flows back to the ocean without hesitation. Thus Krishna establishes, to know his divine glories is to find both wisdom and devotion united. In verse 8, Krishna makes a powerful declaration, I am the source of all creation. Everything emanates from me. The wise, knowing this, worship me with devotion. This verse is the heart of Vibhuti Yoga. Krishna is not just a participant in the universe, he is the origin. Everything, matter, mind, and spirit, flows from him. Psychology calls this the foundation of meaning. Recognizing a single source gives purpose to existence. Neuroscience suggests that when the brain perceives unity and coherence, stress decreases and resilience grows. Logic explains, if countless rivers exist, all must trace back to the one ocean. In verse 9, he continues, with their minds fixed on me, their lives surrendered to me, enlightening one another and speaking of me, my devotees find joy and satisfaction. This is devotion not as fear, but as love. The wise rejoice in remembering Krishna, sharing his glory, and living with their hearts aligned to him. Psychology shows that shared devotion strengthens bonds and creates collective resilience. Neuroscience reveals that positive storytelling and group meditation release dopamine and oxytocin, deepening joy and unity. Logic affirms, the fire grows brighter when many logs burn together. In verse 10, Krishna promises to those who are devoted to me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. Here lies the secret. Love opens the door to wisdom. True knowledge is not achieved by force but gifted through devotion. Psychology calls this inspiration. Deep love awakens higher intelligence. Neuroscience shows that love and faith activate brain regions of creativity and insight. Logic proves, the locked door yields not to force, but to the right key, and that key is devotion. In verse 11, Krishna assures, out of compassion, I dwell in their hearts, and with the lamp of knowledge, I dispel the darkness of ignorance. This is divine grace. Krishna does not remain distant. He enters the heart of the devotee and lights it with wisdom. Psychology interprets this as inner transformation, when love shifts the subconscious patterns into light. Neuroscience confirms that mindfulness and devotion rewire neural pathways, dissolving old ignorance into clarity. Logic illustrates. A single lamp removes the darkness of a room that has stood for centuries. Thus, Krishna reveals that the true path is devotion. Love leads to wisdom, and wisdom leads to union with him. In verse 12 to 13, Arjuna, overwhelmed by Krishna's words, begins to praise him. You are the supreme divine person, the ultimate refuge, the purest truth. All the great sages, Narada, Asita, Devala Vyasa, proclaim you as the eternal, the unborn, the greatest Lord. Arjuna's heart has shifted from doubt to reverence. Now he sees clearly. Krishna is not just his charioteer, but the eternal Godhead recognized by sages through time. Psychology calls this a breakthrough, when confusion gives way to clarity, and the mind aligns with truth. Neuroscience shows that awe reshapes perception, activating brain regions that make us feel connected to something far greater. Logic makes it plain. When many trusted witnesses affirm the same truth across ages, its foundation cannot be doubted. In verse 14, Arjuna declares, O Krishna, I accept all that you have said as truth. Neither the gods nor the demons fully understand your glory. Here Arjuna humbles himself. Even celestial beings cannot grasp the infinite nature of Krishna, so how could a mortal claim full understanding? Psychology recognizes this as surrender of ego. Admitting limits opens the way for higher wisdom. Neuroscience observes that humility enhances learning by quieting the brain's defensive circuits. Logic illustrates. The eye can see the sky, but never its end. In verse 15, Arjuna continues, You alone know yourself, O Supreme Person, Source of all beings, Lord of all creation, God of gods, Ruler of the universe. This is the climax of praise. Krishna alone truly knows Krishna. The source cannot be fully comprehended by what it created. Psychology calls this ultimate trust, when the seeker realizes the guide knows the path beyond human measure. Neuroscience links such surrender to profound peace, as control is handed to the higher intelligence. Logic proves, only the ocean knows its full depth, not the waves upon its surface. In verse 16 to 17, Arjuna pleads, Please describe your divine glories, by which you pervade all the worlds. How shall I meditate on you? In what forms shall I remember you? This shows Arjuna's longing, not just for philosophy, but for a living connection. He wants guidance on how to hold Krishna in constant remembrance. Psychology reveals this as practical devotion. Turning abstract truths into daily focus anchors the mind. Neuroscience suggests that having symbols or images strengthens memory and sustained attention. Logic reminds a traveler needs not only the idea of a destination, but also markers along the road. In verse 18, Arjuna concludes his plea. O Janardana, describe to me once again your powers and glories, for I can never tire of hearing your nectar-like words. This is devotion's sweetest sign, never tiring of remembering the beloved. The words of Krishna are not information, but nourishment to the soul. Psychology calls this intrinsic motivation, when love itself drives learning and joy. Neuroscience confirms that repetition in joy builds stronger pathways than repetition in compulsion. Logic proves, no one wearies of drinking pure water, no matter how often it is offered. Thus, Arjuna stands in awe, ready to hear the infinite manifestations of Krishna's glory. In verse 19, Krishna responds to Arjuna's heartfelt request. Very well, O Arjuna, I shall describe to you my divine glories, but only the chief ones, for there is no end to my manifestations. Here, Krishna sets the stage. His powers and forms are infinite, beyond counting, yet, out of compassion, he will reveal the most striking expressions to help Arjuna focus. Psychology calls this selective guidance. The mind cannot grasp infinity, so the teacher gives the student meaningful highlights. Neuroscience shows that focus on essentials strengthens understanding, while too much detail can overwhelm the brain. Logic reminds, a single drop reveals the taste of the ocean. In verse 20, Krishna begins his revelations. I am the Self, O Arjuna, seated in the heart of all beings. I am the beginning, the middle, and the end of all creatures. This is the essence of his glory, the indwelling self that animates every being. From creation to dissolution, Krishna is the eternal witness. Psychology interprets this as the inner presence, the unchanging core beneath shifting moods and identities. Neuroscience recognizes the constant sense of self, maintained by the brain even through changing experiences. Logic illustrates, the thread runs through every bead of the necklace, holding them as one. In verse 21, Krishna expands, Of the Aditus, I am Vishnu. Of the lights, I am the radiant sun. Of the Maruts, I am Marisi. And among stars, I am the moon. Here Krishna identifies with the brightest and most influential among beings. The sun that sustains life, the moon that soothes and guides, the gods who uphold order. Psychology explains this as symbolic association. Great powers of nature remind us of the divine within them. Neuroscience shows how awe in nature activates circuits of humility, inspiration, and interconnectedness. Logic makes it clear. The highest point of any category reveals the essence of that category. In verse 22, Krishna continues, "Of the Vedas, I am the Samaveda. Of the gods, I am Indra. Of the senses, I am the mind. And among living beings, I am consciousness itself." This is profound. Krishna is the Samaveda, the most musical, filled with devotion. He is Indra, king among gods. He is the mind ruler of the senses. And above all, he is the Chaitanya, the living consciousness. Psychology sees this as Krishna identifying himself with the seat of awareness. The mind and consciousness, the root of all perception. Neuroscience affirms that consciousness remains the greatest mystery, the spark behind all neural activity. Logic clarifies. Without consciousness, nothing can be known. Therefore, it must be the divine essence itself. Thus, Krishna begins unveiling his Vibhutis, divine glories, shining through creation. In verse 23, Krishna says, "Of the Rudras I am Shankara, of the Yakshas and Rakshasas I am Kubera, of the Vashas I am Agni, and of mountains I am Meru." Here Krishna identifies with the greatest among divine beings and natural forces. Shankara, Lord Shiva, in his Rudra form, the transformer and dissolver. Kubera, the Lord of wealth. Agni, the fire god, consuming and purifying. Meru, the mythical golden mountain, axis of the world. Psychology explains this as archetypes, symbols of transformation, wealth, energy, and stability. Neuroscience shows how myths and symbols activate deep memory networks, shaping human culture and behavior. Logic illustrates. The peak of each domain reflects the essence of the whole domain. In verse 24, he continues, "Of priests, I am Brahaspati. Of generals, I am Skanda. Of bodies of water, I am the ocean." Here Krishna declares himself as wisdom Brihaspati, guru of the gods, courage Skanda, the warlord, and vastness the ocean. Psychology links this to the guiding roles of teacher, protector, and the unconscious mind, deep and immeasurable like the sea. Neuroscience compares the ocean to the brain's depth. Conscious waves on the surface, unconscious currents below. Logic affirms. The whole ocean outweighs all rivers. Greatness lies in totality. In verse 25 he says, "Of the great sages, I am Brig. Of sounds, I am Om. Of sacrifices, I am Japa." Silent repetition of the divine name. Krishna reveals himself as Sage Brig, a seer of wisdom. Om, the primal vibration of creation. Japa, the quiet yet powerful offering of devotion. Psychology interprets japa as focused attention, training the mind through repetition. Neuroscience confirms that mantra repetition calms brainwaves, inducing states of peace. Logic proves. The seed syllable Om contains the potential of all sound. In verse 26 he continues, "Of trees, I am the Ashvatha sacred fig. Of divine sages, I am Narada. Of Gandharvas, I am Chitpradata. Of perfected beings, I am Kapila." The sacred fig tree people is worshipped as eternal and life-giving. Narada is the divine sage who spreads devotion. Chitrarada represents celestial music. Kapila embodies deep spiritual realization. Psychology reflects. The tree symbolizes rootedness and growth. The sage wisdom, the musician beauty, the seer enlightenment. Neuroscience shows that devotion, music, and wisdom activate different but harmonious regions of the brain. Logic affirms. The highest qualities in each domain are rays of the same source. In verse 27, Krishna says, "Of horses, I am Uchishravas, born of the nectar of the ocean. Of lordly elephants, I am Aruvata. Among men, I am the king." He identifies with nobility, power, and leadership. Horse of divine origin, elephant of majesty, and the ruling king. Psychology explains this as archetypes of energy, strength, and authority. Neuroscience shows how symbols of power trigger emotions of respect and order. Logic makes it clear. The leader embodies the strength of all followers. In verse 28, he declares, "Of weapons, I am the thunderbolt. Of cows, I am Kamadanu, the wish-fulfilling cow. Of progenitors, I am Kandarpa, the god of love. And of serpents, I am Vasuki." Here he is, the thunderbolt, indestructible force. Kamadanu, giver of abundance, love, creative power, and Vasuki, symbol of primal energy. Psychology connects these two human drives: force, nurture, love, and primal instincts. Neuroscience reflects. These drives originate in the most ancient layers of the brain. Logic shows. Creation needs both power and love, force and nurture. In verse 29 he continues, "Of serpents, I am Ananta. Of aquatics, I am Varuna. Of ancestors, I am Ariyama. Of punishers, I am Yama, the god of death." He is the endless serpent infinity, Varuna, lord of waters, Ariyama, ancestral guide, and Yama, justice at death. Psychology interprets this as symbols of infinity, depth, lineage, and morality. Neuroscience affirms that mortality awareness shapes ethical behavior. Logic clarifies. Death gives meaning to life by setting its boundaries. In verse 30, Krishna says, "Of the Datyas Titans, I am Prahlada. Of time, I am eternal time. Of animals, I am the lion. And of birds, I am Garuda." He is Prahlada, devotion in the face of tyranny. Time, the destroyer. Lion, king of beasts. Garuda, king of birds. Psychology recognizes these as courage, endurance, strength, and transcendence. Neuroscience shows symbols of bravery and guardianship activate primal survival circuits. Logic proves. The king of each realm points to the highest order of that realm. In verse 31, Krishna concludes this section. Of purifiers, I am the wind. Of warriors, I am Rama. Of fishes, I am the shark. Among rivers, I am the Ganga. He identifies with purifying breath, heroic virtue, Lord Rama, the strongest fish, and the sacred river Ganga. Psychology calls this cleansing archetypes. Breath purification, hero virtue, predator, strength, and river sacred flow. Neuroscience confirms that breathwork changes brain states, and symbols like rivers create deep spiritual resonance. Logic illustrates. Just as the Ganga sanctifies all who touch it, the divine purifies all life. Thus Krishna shows Arjuna that wherever greatness, power, beauty, or purity is seen, it is a spark of his glory. In verse 32, Krishna declares, "Of creations, I am the beginning, the middle, and the end. Of sciences, I am the science of the self. Of logicians, I am the conclusive truth." Here Krishna identifies as time itself, the origin, sustainer, and dissolver of all. He is also spiritual knowledge, the highest science and truth, the ultimate goal of logic. Psychology shows this as the human quest for meaning, seeking origin, purpose, and conclusion. Neuroscience reminds us that the brain is wired to search for patterns and truth, and finds peace when reality aligns with meaning. Logic proves the circle of creation is complete only when beginning, middle, and end are united in one. In verse 33 he continues, "Of letters, I am the letter A. Of compound words, I am the dual. I am the inexhaustible time. And, of creators, I am Brahma." The letter A is the seed of speech. The dual represents union in diversity. Time is eternal, and Brahma, the creator, acts under his will. Psychology calls this the foundation of expression and creativity. Neuroscience affirms that language begins with elemental sounds, shaping thought. Logic explains. The seed contains the tree, and the first sound sustains all speech. In verse 34, Krishna says, "I am death that takes all, and I am the source of new things yet to be. Of feminine qualities, I am fame, prosperity, speech, memory, intelligence, steadfastness, and patience." Here Krishna shows himself as both death and life, the taker and the giver, the end and the beginning. He is also the shining feminine virtues. Psychology explains death and birth as cycles of transformation, and the feminine archetype as nurturing, wise, and enduring. Neuroscience shows how memory, intelligence, and patience are key brain functions for human progress. Logic makes it clear, endings and beginnings are two faces of the same reality. In verse 35, he declares, "Of hymns, I am the Brihatsama. Of poetic meters, I am Gayatri. Of months, I am Margashirsha. Of seasons, I am spring." Here Krishna reveals himself as harmony song, rhythm, meter, auspicious time, the holy month, and beauty spring. Psychology reflects these as archetypes of joy, rhythm, and renewal. Neuroscience shows music and rhythm synchronize the brain, and seasons shape human mood and behavior. Logic proves the best of each cycle is a glimpse of the eternal. In verse 36 he says, "I am the gambling of the cunning. I am the splendor of the splendid. I am victory. I am effort. I am the strength of the strong." Here Krishna even claims the cleverness and strategy, the glow and glory, and the will behind victory. Psychology sees this as the spectrum of human drive, from cunning to noble strength. Neuroscience shows effort and reward circuits fuel motivation. Logic affirms the spark of success, whether used wisely or unwisely, still comes from the divine source. In verse 37, he continues, "Of the Vrishnis, I am Vasudeva. Of the Pandavas, I am Arjuna. Among sages, I am Vyasa. I am Ush." He identifies as Vasudeva, the divine hero, Arjuna the seeker, Vyasa, the author of wisdom, and Dushanas, the poet of vision. Psychology connects this to roles we all play: hero, seeker, teacher, and artist. Neuroscience shows different cognitive modes: action, curiosity, reasoning, and creativity. Logic illustrates the many roles all reflect the same underlying consciousness. In verse 38, he declares, "Of punishers, I am the rod of discipline. Of those who seek victory, I am morality. Of secrets, I am silence. Of the wise, I am wisdom." Here Krishna is discipline, justice, silence, and wisdom. Psychology calls these the foundations of character. Neuroscience shows silence and morality regulate brain states, enabling clarity. Logic affirms silence speaks deeper than words. and discipline upholds justice. In verse 39, he says, I am the seed of all beings. Nothing moving or unmoving can exist without me. This is the essence of Vibhuti Yoga. Krishna is the seed, the cause, the root of all existence. Psychology understands this as the universal archetype, the origin within all forms. Neuroscience compares this to the single DNA code underlying diverse life. Logic makes it simple. Without the seed, no tree. Without the root, no life. In verse 40, Krishna admits, there is no end to my divine manifestations. What I have spoken to you is only a small portion of my infinite glory. Even after listing countless glories, he reminds Arjuna that the divine cannot be contained in words. In verse 41, he adds, whatever is glorious, beautiful, or powerful, know that to be a spark of my splendor. Psychology says greatness inspires because it reflects the divine archetype within. Neuroscience shows beauty and awe, activate networks of transcendence in the brain. Logic proves every spark points back to the fire. Finally, in verse 42, Krishna concludes, but what need is there for all this detailed knowledge? O Arjuna, with a single fragment of myself, I pervade and support the entire universe. This is the climax of chapter 10. The universe itself is sustained by just one fraction of Krishna's infinite being. Psychology reveals this as the principle of wholeness. The part reflects the whole. Neuroscience shows fractal patterns. The small contains the map of the vast. Logic affirms, if a spark can light the world, imagine the fire itself. Thus ends chapter 10, Vibhuti Yoga, the Yoga of Divine Glories. Krishna reveals himself in all greatness, beauty, power, and wisdom, teaching Arjuna that to see the world rightly is to see the divine in everything.